Here we're going to talk about the Shape Builder, Live Trace, and Live Paint. The Shape Builder is another way of combining shapes on your artboard, similar to working with the Pathfinder panel. Let me show you what I have here. There's a bunch of different shapes combined to create this cat. Now, if I wanted to, I could go to the Pathfinder and try to merge all the shapes into one. Now there's a tool that you can use to combine shapes in one single stroke, or several little strokes. Let me show you how it works. So I'll select my second cat here and grab the Shape Builder tool. And then with the Shape Builder tool, all I need to do is click and drag inside the selected area to merge those shapes. Now that drag didn't get everything, but the shape is still selected, so I can drag in this direction and drag in this direction and there. Now I've got everything, almost everything, except for like this little piece here. Now I've got one solid shape. Now, an even faster way of working is to make a selection of your object, grab the Shape Builder tool, hold down the Shift key, and this will actually let you grab a marquee around your object and release everything gathered together. Now let's talk about tracing placed images. I have two fish files that I'd like you to place here. There's placed fish 1. And we'll get the other guy while we're at it. Let me shrink this guy up just a little bit. There we go. Now, when you have placed artwork, you can actually convert that into line art or Illustrator drawing vector art by selecting the object and clicking on the Image Trace button. Let's take a look at these options up here before we click that button. The first thing is the linked file, and if you click on it, you'll see a list of all of the linked files in this document. So you see both of our fish. You could click on this button to relink it just in case it moved or it updated. You could also use this button to go to the link if you wanted to select the object here and then have it be selected on the artboard. You can update the link in case the object was edited outside of Illustrator. And then with this button here, you can edit the original. So if it was a file created in another program, or even if it was a file created in another document within Illustrator, you could click that button to go edit it. This button here is a link to the same object. And it's pretty much a lot of the same options there. Relink, go to link, edit original, update link. Now sometimes with placed images, if you move the placed image or move the Illustrator file to a new location but don't take the placed image with it, when you open up the file in Illustrator, you may get a warning or a dialog box that says relink, missing image, and then you would have to say, yes, please, and go find it and put it in the same folder, or forget about it, ignore it, or go find a new image to link. Because when you're placing an image, you're not actually placing the exact image. What you're doing is you're placing a low resolution version of that image into your file as a working version of the image. When you actually go to print, the higher quality version of it will actually be printed. So if you were going to send this file to a printer, you would either do one of two things. You would send this file with the original artwork that's placed, or you would click the embed button to put the higher resolution version of the file embedded in this file as like a permanent part of this file, so it doesn't have to go out and find any additional file to print properly. Here's where you can see that this placed file is RGB and 72 pixels per inch. There's the embed button, and this is the link to edit the original, and here we're at the image trace. Now this drop-down menu gives you access to a bunch of different tracing options, but I'd like to just go ahead and click the image trace button first and show you how it works. Now clicking on it will give you a result based on the preset options. You can choose any of those options that I had shown you before that were to the right if you happen to know which one you want. But since you're new, what you might want to do instead is toggle through them and see how your object will look with each of the different settings. So there's photo, high and low fidelity, 3 colors, 6 and 16, shades of gray, so it's converting it to grayscale if it was color, how it might look if it were a black and white logo, sketched art, which has a little more detail, silhouette, line art, technical drawing, So what you want might fall somewhere in between all of these options. To modify any of these presets, you'll click on this little button here to open up the Image Trace panel. Here you can access all these different settings for each option that could modify how your tracing will look. Here's access to that preset menu again. You could also view tracing result, which is what we're seeing here. Tracing result with outlines, so you could see all the different paths that are grouped together. Outlines only, outlines with the source image below, or just the source image, which doesn't really help you because you need to see what it's going to look like afterwards. So probably the tracing results and or tracing results with outline. Then you could choose the color mode, which is color, grayscale, or black and white. And the palette. You could go with an automatic palette, which will try to use as many colors in your original. If you go with a limited palette, you can specify the number of colors. And if you go with full tone, you get the maximum of 100. Now, automatic may not give you everything that you want, so again, you may have to play around with these different options to get the best quality version. Or, you might actually prefer the reduced number of colors and like how it's sort of skewed the way the original looks, but it has a lot of character. If you want, you can expand this advanced area and adjust the paths, corners, noise, the method of the mask being used, and all of these other options. So my suggestion to you is to come in here and play around with everything so you can see how it all works. Every once in a while, you'll click on something and it doesn't really modify what you're seeing. It really depends on your artwork. So you'll have to play around with it. Now, noise is usually related to like pixelation, and you may like the way it looks with more noise. This original image had a lot of dots on it, but if you wanted to reduce a lot of the coloration or increase a lot of the coloration, you might want to play around with the noise. Go ahead and spend some time playing around with these different options. Up here at the top is a preview of what your original and your finished traced version looks like, so you might want to toggle that on and off. Here's a little info about how many paths and colors and anchors are being used in your traced result. And the buttons up at the top here will allow you to switch to automatic color, high color, low color, grayscale, black and white, and outline mode. So there's so many different ways that you can move around the screen here. And once you have your tracing result the way you like, you can do a couple of different things. Now notice that the object has a bounding box around it. The tracing image is still acting like a single unit. So if you wanted to move it around on the artboard, it's still a single unit. In fact, it's probably including the white space around the fish as part of the object. You can keep your objects like this as tracings and work with them as often as you need. However, let's move this cat. If you see the cat's falling behind it, that white area is part of the bounding box. Now you could manipulate that object's blending mode to potentially modify how it looks on the artboard. So let's try multiply. So now we are getting rid of the white areas around it, but it's also bleeding into the shape of the cat. So if you really needed to isolate the fish in this case from its white background, what you'd want to do is expand the results. So I'm going to undo and click on the expand button here at the top of the screen. The expand button converts your traced object into actual vector artwork. It's a grouped object. You can right click to ungroup, and then if you're lucky, you might be able to select just the white area and delete it to separate it from your object. Now, then what I would probably do is select all of those pieces and regroup them so that I could then move that object around as a single unit without worrying about any of the pieces falling apart. Let's make this guy a little bit bigger and we'll do the same thing. Since this is more like line art, I wanted to show you how this would look. So again, you have your placed artwork. You could embed it to make it part of the file if you want. Or if you want, you go ahead and straight image trace. Depending on the presets that you have here, you'll get different results. You can play around with the different sliders and everything to see if you can modify the look of it. And when you're happy, you can either keep things as they are or click the expand button. Now, before you do anything else, the object could be converted into what's called a live paint group. The live paint tools are underneath your shape builder. There's a live paint bucket as well as a live paint selection tool. Select the live paint bucket and notice that it's a funny little cursor. And it might take a little bit of getting used to because there's a few different parts, because you could actually pour the selected color of paint into a shape or a stroke or a fill. But you need to put the tip of that black arrow where you want it to go. I always get confused. I think, oh, it should be the tip of the paint bucket and not the little black arrow in between the color picker and the bucket. So just get used to that. That's where you're supposed to go. So notice as I put my cursor on top of the object, I get this little red bounding box and a little message that says, click to make a live paint group. I'm going to click to make it a live paint group, and check out what happened. Every time I put my cursor over these individual spots, it presumes that I want to colorize those individual pieces with separate color. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer so that you can see what's going on here. Now, let me grab that tool again. So you can see that it's prompting me to fill these individual pieces. So if I wanted to change the color, I could use my left and right arrows to toggle between the different colors, or I can even go up a level or down a level by clicking my up-down arrows. Now, I find it's just easier to get exactly where I want to go using my left-right arrows. So let's say I want to fill this selected shape with orange instead. All I have to do is select that color and click. So now if I want to fill this shape with a different color, I'll just toggle to the color that I want to use, and then make sure that the tip of my arrow is in the spot that I want to colorize before I click. So maybe I want to make this fish blue, but this fish I want to make it green. But I'm making sure that I'm only clicking where the tip of that black arrow goes. And this one I could make yet another color. Make it purple, like so. Anyway, I'm just sort of randomly clicking around here. So you get the general idea. Now this particular shape doesn't really have any strokes. So what we're going to do is select the whole thing and delete it. And we're going to move down a little bit further and talk about working with live paint. So I have 3 stars and 2 circles, and I've deliberately pasted them so that there's a little bit of a gap between them. I'm going to select all of them, grab my live paint tool, clicking on top of them. There's that message, click to make a live paint group. So now it's a live paint group, so all of the individual pieces I can colorize by clicking. So for instance, if I want to make this one red, this one yellow, this one green, and so forth, I just have to select my color and then make sure that the tip of that black arrow is in the position so that I can colorize, like so. Now these shapes do have a stroke on them, but it's a 1-point stroke. So I'd probably want to increase the stroke weight so that we can see this a little bit easier. And notice that when you're in live paint and you select the grouping, you have funky looking anchor points around the corners and midpoints of your object. Let's zoom in again. And we'll grab that tool one more time. Now, if you hold down your Shift key while you're hovering on top of a stroke, you have to be right on top of the stroke, you'll notice that the paintbrush appears instead of the paint bucket. And like before, if you want to change the color, like maybe I want to have a different color stroke than this, with my Shift key still held down, I can scroll through and choose another color to paint that segment. Now the segment went back to a 1-point stroke, but because it's still active, I should be able to paint onto it and then paint with that thickness. And you'll notice the segment only changed color for that individual slice. So if I wanted to go and change this guy, I would have to choose my color and then click right on the stroke to change the color of the stroke. So you can toggle between the stroke and the fill as long as your cursor is in the right place and you use the Shift key before you click, and then hold down the Shift key if you're on the stroke and toggle through the colors with your arrows until you find the color that you'd like to fill with. Now you could use the Alt or Option key to actually sample colors. So let's say I wanted to use this pink color. And once I release my keyboard shortcut, the Alt or Option key, I could then go in and paint another area. So you can do that at any time, sampling and then painting. So maybe I want to sample this green and paint it here. Sampling and painting at any time. So let's do sample and then paint. And you could go in any direction that works good for you. You can access additional Live Paint features through the Object menu. So there's Object, Live Paint. And here's where you could release a Live Paint group, expand a Live Paint group, which means turn it into editable artwork outside of the group. And then there's this thing here called Gap Options. Now the Gap Options deal with when there's a space in between a group. So in this live grouping, this piece is separate from this piece because of this gap right here. So depending on how far apart your objects are, you may have separate shapes. And if you wanted this to be a whole shape, you could modify the gap options. So let's go back up to that menu, Live Paint Gap Options. And here's where you can modify the gap detection rules. The paint can stop at small gaps, medium gaps, large gaps, or custom gaps. And depending on which one you choose, that will determine the number of points within each gap. So there's large gaps 12. Custom, you can specify whatever you need. You could also change the gap preview color from red to any of these other options or blend your own color depending on your artwork. One of those colors might not work for you. When you have the options set, click OK. And then when you go to paint with your Live Paint group, you can see if that gap is large enough. Now this one is much larger than 12 points, so I might have to go back in there to the Live Paint Gap Options. What makes this so cool is that with the preview option, we should be able to see any gap detection. So right now we have custom gaps. Let's see, let's go to small gaps. So small gaps should be detected here. There's medium gaps. So now this space is being detected. There's large gaps. I don't know if there's any larger gaps there. And custom gaps. So we could bump this one up to something like 35. And now it's spanning that space. If we wanted, we could specify the number of points for gap detection and then go back in with that tool to fill in those shapes.